Okay. I'll call the Newport Beach City Council study session for October 14th, 2008 to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Rosansky is absent.
Okay. First item on our agenda under current business is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilman Henn?
I have none.
Mayor Pro Tem Daigle?
Yes, on item 5, let me get my notes here. It's a contract that references a schedule. I think the schedule was inadvertently admitted. Does anyone have any objections if we add that at the time we roll up the consent calendar?
Okay. We can have staff provide the council a piece of paper saying what that schedule is. It can be part of your adoption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Gardner?
Yes, on number 16, we say that the approved scope of work assumed a minimal level of response to comments. Who makes that assumption?
The staff and the consultant do when we're initiating the contract, and then we don't really know what we're going to get until we receive the comments.
But it's not just the consultant, so somebody with knowledge of the city is involved?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second one, number 20, because of the concern about the condition of the bridge over the Back Bay Channel, what is the condition? I mean, if I just saw that as a resident, I might be concerned. So I don't know whether we need to pull that off and explain it more this evening, or whether it's a simple answer.
Well, Mayor and members of council, I think the idea is that we want to get a good assessment. We want Caltrans to inspect that bridge. We want to make sure that we know exactly what we're getting into.
All right.
If we are
As it
going to
reads, it
accept
implies that we have a knowledge. So I think I'll pull that tonight just to have that clarified.
Okay, I had a question on 20 also. In the letter, there's a typo. It says in the third line from the bottom, it says request a through inspection. I think you mean thorough.
Oh, good old spell check. Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Webb? Okay, and I have no items.
Yes.
Okay, first item on the study session is motorized vehicles on the boardwalk. Chief Clyde?
Councilman Henn has requested this item and has been very patient. I think he requested it before summer started, actually, or early into summer. So we told him that we would be checking the status and paying attention and trying to get some stats during the summer and coming to the council after the summer concluded with a study session item. So Chief Klein will lead us off there.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members. John Klein, Police Chief. Can you give you a quick overview of some of the motorized vehicles that are being used and also how that pertains to the boardwalk and the boardwalk usage? As far as motorized vehicles, there's a pretty good variety of different motorized vehicles. You have some of the small miniature motorized motorcycles, which are the pocket rockets. Then you have the golf carts, motorized bicycles, mopeds, the motorized scooters, motorized skateboards, then also the mobile devices that are used by the disabled, along with the Segways, the Surreys, and the roller skates and rollerbladers. Some of them aren't mechanical, but these are all devices that at times can be seen on the boardwalk. Although, for the most part, all the motorized vehicles are restricted from use on the boardwalk with the exception of the Segways, which under law are allowed to be used any place that pedestrians operate, and then some of the motorized vehicles that are restricted for use by handicapped people. And in the enforcement of some of the motorized vehicles, many of these motorized vehicles are not even allowed to be used on the street. So as far as our enforcement with some of the motorized skateboards, it becomes pretty complicated trying to figure out what classification they fall into. Are they licensed by the state? Do they fall into vehicles? Are they equipped correctly? And we have a few officers in town that are pretty well versed in that. Most of the other officers kind of struggle with trying to figure out the use of the motorized vehicles. And most of the motorized vehicles we see more often in some of the private communities in the areas surrounding the residential communities. Or in the boardwalk, most of what we're seeing are the bicycles, the skateboards, the pedestrians, some Segways, and also the skate roller skates.
When you say bicycles, you mean just normal bicycles?
Normal bicycles, yes. And The boardwalk really is just restricted to three main components, which is the pedestrians, either skaters, whether that's inline or regular roller skates, and the bicyclists. Those are the three main areas that are allowed. But as I said, segways are allowed on there because they can operate where pedestrians operate. We have had a fair amount of complaints in the last couple of years about skateboards on the boardwalk. We've taken some pretty good action toward that. As the report says, in 2006, we wrote 35 skateboard tickets just on the boardwalk itself. In 2007, we wrote 101. As of the start of August this year, we're up to 59. So we're continuing with our enforcement to deal with the skateboards, which is what we get the majority of the complaints about from the community. Even with that, we have not had a lot of documented accidents on the boardwalks. We have a few that have been reported to us, but from what I'm getting from the community, that there are more that go unreported, collisions between bicyclists and skateboarders and pedestrians. The biggest thing we have is really the size of the boardwalk. It's between 10 and 15 feet, depending on the area you're at, and really just the congestion. It's much like the streets in Newport. As summer gets into full swing, the streets get congested as well as the boardwalks. So we're dealing with different groups of people using the boardwalk. We got adults, we got families, we got kids, interspersed with bicyclists. Some going, at a reasonable speed, some going faster. And then the rollerbladers as well. So you got three different types of people moving at three different speeds. And that congestion is what causes most of the problems down there. But it is a concern for a fair amount of the residents down there, the mix of people and the issues on the boardwalk. Anytime we try to do enforcement, we try to follow that up with some kind of education. And in July of this year, through the Newport Beach TV program on the cable channel, we did a program that we do every other month. The topics for July, specifically for the summer, were low-speed vehicles and boardwalk safety. Again, just to try to get that message out. Understand that the target group for that is fairly limited, but it's a one way, at least trying to educate some of the residents. I don't expect that the visitor population is going to get that message, but we're also looking at some other ways of possibly taking that same format and moving it into some of the hotels. So if we have a law enforcement message, we can get it delivered to the hotels as well and target that visitor population. One of the areas that we do have issues with from time to time is the use of Surrey cycles. And the Surrey cycles are the larger cycles that have four wheels that can carry between 4 and 6 people. And they're rented. There's 3 locations in the city that rent the Surrey cycles. This is an issue we've dealt with at various times over the years. The Surrey cycles are not allowed to be on the boardwalk. They are restricted from that. They can be ridden on the street. And from my personal perspective, I don't believe it's safe for them to operate on the street, but they are allowed to be there because it's, that's what the vehicle code says. But having been down there and seen the families with 6, 7 people in these Surrey cycles driving down Balboa, it gives me some concern. But, like bicycles, they have a right to be there, and we can't restrict that. Part of the Surrey cycles issue is that there's an ordinance that says that each bicycle is marked with a sign that says it cannot be ridden on the boardwalk. It's also part of the rental contract that people sign that says, they're being noticed that you cannot ride the Surrey cycles on the boardwalk and they're restricted to the streets. That's been in place for several years. We're in the process of going through right now and ensuring that it's still being in compliance. We have 3 locations in town that do have rent Surrey cycles. 2 of them are in compliance. One of them is not, and we're working with that business. But that business only has 1 Surrey cycle to rent. I did get a call from a citizen today that I believe is going to speak a little bit later about his experience with some of the Surrey cycles, and that he had an experience that they're actually telling people that it's okay to ride on the boardwalk because the police department said it's okay. That's clearly not the case. I sent an officer down today to contact them and reassure them that they do not have our permission to be on the boardwalk or tell anybody that it's okay to be on the boardwalk. Segways, we do have one company in town that rents segways, but they do, that's my understanding, they do that in conjunction with tours, and they have a guide. They use the boardwalk. I'm not aware of any company in town that's renting individual segways to be used. And, that gives some of the residents some concern as well because of the size of the Segway. And again, now we're mixing another element of the Segway into that congested area with the bicycles, the pedestrians, and the skaters. So that's kind of an overview. We do a fair amount of enforcement on the boardwalk. We use our 5-person bicycle team to do that, to address those concerns. We also use our motor officers and our patrol officers. But there's really only so much we can do from the enforcement arena to do that. To have significant, to correct a lot of the behavior, it's going to take some changes in the ordinances or, more officers down there stationed to deal with it. But again, when I look at it, we've only had a few documented accidents that have been reported to us, and that's about all I can go from. But I know the residents have expressed a concern about that and the activity they see on the weekends, particularly in the summer. So,
Councilman Henn, any questions?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions, some clarification. My understanding is that we have to use sworn police officers to issue citations. There's no lesser qualification level of person that could be posted out there on the boardwalk to issue citations.
that is correct. The only people we use in the department for any kind of enforcement are PCOs, and they're restricted to parking patrol issues. So
Yeah.
we would have to have sworn police officers out there to do this enforcement.
One of the other problems that we have is speed, regardless of the vehicle. Some bicyclists consider that to be a high speed, especially the more capable bicyclists. I've seen them moving, have to be 20, 25 miles an hour down there. And in the dead of night, that's really dangerous. But does a police officer have a ready ability, or do you ever allow police officers to visually estimate speed in terms of issuing a citation?
When we do any kind of speed citations, it's a visual estimation of the speed. There's actually a school they go to, and anybody that uses a radar or a LiDAR device, which all of our traffic people are trained in, that's a backup device to their estimation of speed. But it kind of needs both to do that. I would be very uncomfortable putting an officer out there to just do a visual estimate without the radar or the LiDAR. But that's one of the reasons we use the motor officers out there who all have the LiDAR device assigned to them and can do some of the speed enforcement.
The speed limit is 8 miles an hour.
8 miles an hour, correct.
I'm pretty familiar with that speed. I run just a little slower than that, so I know when somebody is passing me and it's at a fast speed. So, okay. As another point of clarification, under no circumstances is a motorized skateboard, razor, bicycle, under no circumstances is a motorized vehicle of any sort allowable on the boardwalk, other than apparently, for now at least, the Segways.
Correct. The Segways and any device that's being used by the handicap, like some of the little rascals, you'll see those personal mobility devices are authorized. But that person actually has to have a certificate saying that they're disabled. So no, other than that, no motorized vehicles of any kind. There is some nuances in the law that if it's a GoPed and they're pedaling and if they're not operating the engine, then they can be on theirs. But nothing can be on the boardwalk that's actually being operated by gas or electric power.
Okay. One last question, and then I would like to listen to some public comment and then perhaps come back for a wrap on this. But now I've lost my train of thought.
So much for being
Let's
nice.
go to public comment. I'll remember what I had to say.
I have a question. Surrey cycles have been an issue for 10 or 15 years, and I still don't understand why we don't just prohibit them, because I agree they're not a safe place for them to operate. But if one of your police officers sees a Surrey cycle on the sidewalk, I'm talking about any officer, a patrol officer, a traffic officer, a CSI officer, can they cite them, or would they cite them?
They can cite them.
They can,
They can.
but are they instructed to?
Well, we don't give specific instructions about a lot of things, and it's
Yeah.
kind of up to the officer discretion. And one of the things I found difficult with the Surrey cycle is that we're dealing with families. And that's why one of the advantages of having them sign the contract, so they're clearly aware of that. I didn't pull the statistics to see how many tickets we've written for Surrey cycles, but my guess is it wouldn't be very many. But
That's what concerns me, because of the times that I have walked the site as recently as last Wednesday. Number one, I have two beefs. One is with the sidewalks just being there, and second, with the people that are renting it, storing their bicycles and Surrey cycles partially on the sidewalk and in Palm Street. But I passed two Surrey cycles in the matter of about 20 or 30 minutes. And this was a Wednesday, not a weekend. And so I would assume that during the weekends you even get more. I just don't think that enough cautioning of those people doing the Surrey cycles is being done. And they take up over half of the sidewalk. So it makes it very difficult for bicycles going either direction and pedestrians to even be on the sidewalk with them. And I know that we had a lawsuit about 15 years ago, but I don't think we do a collision between a Surrey cycle and a bicycle. But I don't know that we've had any reported accidents recently.
You know, we have addressed the Surrey cycle, and it kind of comes and goes like a lot of things in the city that, you know, and we focus on. We have addressed it, you know, in years past. As we're starting to get back to look at what their requirements are for their ordinances, to making sure that they're all properly marked, their contracts are correct, we're also continuing, we'll step up our enforcement in that as well and reinforce the fact, because like, you know, the education and the enforcement go hand in hand, and we got to do both. So we're doing the education now with the companies, make sure they're aware of it, and now we got to start doing the enforcement on the backside of it. For the
Companies are aware of it, they're just taking advantage of us, in my opinion. Not yours.
So Councilmember Webb just jogged my memory for what it was I was going to ask you, and that is it a reasonable and appropriate thing to do to cite the businesses when their customers improperly use the things they rent?
I don't believe that we can cite the business, particularly if they are notifying them that they can't use the sidewalk and they're signing the contract. I don't believe we have anything to indicate that the company is allowing them to do that. So, I mean, Robin might be able to look at it a little bit later, but I don't believe that, you know, we're going to be able to transfer that to the company itself.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open it for public comments. Anyone that wants to address the council on this, please step forward.
Hi, my name is Laura Keene, and I live on the boardwalk between 8th and 9th Street with my family. And I luckily found out about this meeting last night at the peer-to-peer meeting. This is something very important to me because I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they play on the beach all the time. They have to cross the boardwalk, obviously, to get to the beach. The words out of my mouth the whole day long is look both ways, look both ways, look both ways. There are a lot of traffic on the boardwalk, and there are Surreys. Weekdays, weekends, the Surreys are there, the Segways are there. There are skateboards. There are bikers who ride very fast, much faster than they should be riding on the boardwalk. I'm not as concerned about the Surreys in the point that they're usually not being ridden quickly, and they're usually erratic enough that even my children can dodge out of the way of a Surrey. But the bikes do, the fast bikes and the motorized vehicles, especially the motorized vehicles that would have a motor on them, like the electric bikes have a motor very low by the wheels. Something like that that would hit a small child could cause grave injuries, really. It could be very serious. And I'm not real sure. The Segway owner I've talked to before and really tried to assure me that those can stop very quickly on a dime. I've not actually personally ridden one, and I haven't seen them ridden in a haphazard, dangerous manner. But there are a lot being ridden, and they're rented. So these are not people that are used to them, nor have they really been trained on them. They're just people out enjoying looking at our beach and our beautiful area. So I'm here hoping that not only reform might happen, but that the general codes we already have are enforced, that no motorized vehicles are being used on the boardwalk, and that includes the new electric bikes and the bike rentals, and also that the speed limit is 8 miles an hour. And honestly, I don't know how you enforce that. I'm not sure how you enforce young kids on skateboards that are just trying to have fun. I used to be a high school teacher in Huntington Beach. I know. It's really hard. I don't know how to do that. But I also think, looking now as a parent for the safety of my children and other children that might dash on that boardwalk, we have luckily avoided big accidents. And I just wanted to come here tonight to let you know there are a lot of residents that talk about this, and we're concerned about this, and especially the ones with small kids. And just appreciate your time.
Just a quick aside, I'm so glad you're here, because I remember our conversation on the
Yes.
boardwalk about this, and I couldn't remember what your address was, so I would have walked down to let you know we were having the meeting on this today.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
But I don't think this is probably going to be the last time we discuss this.
I don't think this is going to go away. If this is something that's been cyclical in the past, when a couple residents start voicing opinions, there's too much traffic now for it to really be cyclical. Some determination's got to be made how we're going to best use that recreational space, because it's really, it's overloaded now to the point where I think we need to be proactive instead of reactive after something might happen. So that's why I'm here.
I have a question.
10, 15 years ago, a suggestion was made that perhaps we needed to have another sidewalk out there so that there would be maybe a 5 or 10 foot separation between the two sidewalks to where the bicycles could be on the outside and just pedestrians on the inside. What's your thoughts on something like that?
I had heard about that before. I did not live here. I'm from Indiana. I didn't live here at that time. I'm not sure how that would be done with the ice plant. I really am not sure about the logistics of something like that. Before I gave a really informed opinion, I'd have to really think about that. I can't see a really huge negative, but I don't see any real big positives either, because that's just another boardwalk for someone to have to dash across. But if it's further from the houses, obviously for me, that would be a benefit. So.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Dagan?
Yes, I know the Venice and Santa Monica Boardwalk has that division for portions of it. So they handle or accommodate just a huge amount of traffic, and seems to work pretty good.
Manhattan Beach also does. Manhattan and Hermosa Beach both do.
I think one of the implications, though, for the dual walkway is that then you might get higher speeds where the bicycles go, because you have less pedestrians and runners. So, it's something to really be careful of.
That separate walkway would be a full-on racetrack. There's no doubt about it, with lots of people trying to get to the wet sand, walking across it, especially in the summertime. So I do think there's issues with that, too.
My name's Max Liskin. I've spoken here before. The first thing I'd like to say, I came down here and talked about segways a couple years ago, and I have to say they've been very good citizens. I have no complaints about the segways, occasionally, but they are far less offensive than a couple of new issues. I'd also like to respond directly to the second sidewalk issue. I think all of this comes down to enforcement, and I think with what's going on in the economy, dollars for enforcements are going to be harder and harder to come by. So a thought I had was some type of passive enforcement, and I'm not a person who understands highways, et cetera, but if there's some way that we could have some type of speed bumps, something in the surface that would make people slow down or make it uncomfortable for them to have excessive speeds, I think that would do a lot. Passive, automated type of enforcement has worked, I understand, with cameras in other parts of the community. So that's a suggestion. I understand there's a safety issue or a trip issue, but I'm sure that other highway engineers have come up with stuff that might be helpful. Something as simple as stop signs occasionally placed so that an officer could very easily, if a person ran the stop sign, cite them. That's black and white. So that's sort of the point on which I think is the boardwalk and speed and control and enforcement. I think Councilman Henn said it best. It's about speed. And anything going at a slower rate of speed can be safe. It's when something increases in speed, its mass is not linear, it's exponential. And that represents a real danger. The other point I'd like to make, it goes back to the electric bikes. I think that in the future there might be better coordination between when business licenses are issued in this town with respect to what the needs of the city are. And for example, Z-Clips opened, and since it's opened, there has been a proliferation of electric bikes on the boardwalk. And I photocopied these, and I'll just give them to you. They point out in Z-Clips' literature, they point out we are the largest electric bike dealer on the West Coast. And I think that's fine, and I think that electric bikes represent a great alternative to situations where people might be using cars. But when you're in a community like Newport Beach, especially the peninsula where it's flat, I think a human being is a pretty good alternative to electricity, as opposed to looking at the bike as an alternative to something that's gas-powered. And I think that's just common sense. And, when we talk about speeds, these bikes are heavier, and they talk about cruising speeds of 20 miles an hour. And I see them go 20 miles an hour. And unfortunately, usually the people that are speeding are the people that have had a little bit too much to drink. And I must say that is also the case. I love seeing the Surreys. I love seeing families have fun. The people that are the problem are the people that are drinking driving the Surreys, because they get into the races and et cetera. So that might be another issue in terms of enforcement. So largely, I think if we all, understand there's a problem with speed, and my conclusion would be that human power is better than electric power. Merchants like Z-Clip certainly have their place, but I don't think their bikes have any place on the boardwalk. And finally, with the budget issues coming up, I'd certainly be happy to kick in as a taxpayer for some type of passive enforcement that works 24 hours a day, because it is a 24-hour-a-day issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
I'm Dorothy Beek. I live on the ocean front. I've lived at 620 West Ocean Front for almost 50 years, and so I've seen most of the problems. There is an increase in traffic, but it can be handled. There are two main problems as I see it: the motorized vehicles and the lack of enforcement. Every once in a while, we see officers on bicycles, but very, very rarely. I do not know where they are, but they certainly aren't on the ocean front where I live, where the laws, the ordinances should be enforced. And more than a simple warning from the officers should be given. The people should be cited for the infractions that they commit for not paying attention to the ordinances. And if the word gets out that they will be cited for going too fast or for using the wrong type of vehicle, I think it will change. The oceanfront boardwalk is on many bicycle maps in the area. And on those maps, it should state there is an 8-mile-per-hour limit. No one ever knows about that. The other thing about the Surreys, which are completely inappropriate on the boardwalk, I've walked by the place they rent. In fact, I've even talked about renting them. And sure, there's a sign that says not allowed on the boardwalk, but I have heard the proprietor say, don't pay any attention to that. No one bothers with it. I've heard that several times. And the other thing, I have stopped people going by my house using the Surreys, and I say, see that sign on your handlebars? Every time they say, what's the boardwalk? They haven't the slightest idea what the sign means. Isn't that ridiculous? So, the city does not owe the Surrey people a right to use the boardwalk because they are inappropriate. It was a bad business decision. If a patrolling officer could slow down the traffic to the allowed speed and enforce the ban on Surreys and motorized vehicles, I think the problems would be solved. And as to Mr. Webb's memory of the extra sidewalk, just remember, if you build it, they will come. We know that. And
we haven't built things and they still...
We won't like it if they were to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to say, it's nice to see so many of my neighbors down here this afternoon. So.
Good afternoon, W.R. Dilding, 300 block of East Balboa.
Here's another one.
Doty just made one of the statements that I had reservation about making here, plus another one. And pacing the floor this morning, remembering that as an employer for 40-plus years, I never criticized anybody in front of other people. So I, in turn, called the appropriate party, and at 2:30 today, I saw his people out there addressing the situation today. It's just ridiculous. I approached this unit Friday afternoon to rent a Surrey for this weekend, and what I was told, I was really torqued off. One thing Mr. Webb brought up, or Councilmember Webb brought up, was about their doing business on the sidewalk. Is that a code enforcement issue, or is that a police department issue? When I went into this issue about surveys being written on the sidewalk, they said that's police department. And then I found this on the agenda last Thursday morning when I picked it up. But maybe code enforcement should be given a memo or something, because at 2:30 today, there were surveys sitting out on the sidewalk. And right there at Palm, right. And that's where they deliver. Their only access to delivering the survey is on the boardwalk. And what really got me involved, there was a conditional use permit for fast food takeout in the front, and I filed an appeal or a question on that. How could they comply with the conditional use permit if they couldn't comply with the city regulation and their attitude towards it? But I've had a very good discussion with the chief. From our discussion, I think he's gotten the word. I'm sure he's gotten the word by now, and it takes quite a man to get up and say that somebody squealed on him. This was getting ready to and had a little self-confidence, concerned about it. But I think I go along with everything that's been said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. As president of Central Newport Beach Community Association, my name is Louise Funenberg. We have 4 written policies for our bylaws for our community association. We represent over 300 families on the peninsula. And basically, we're really opposed to widening the sidewalk. We might be convinced otherwise, but right now that's our policy. We are supporting not only the oceanfront walk, but from Edgewater to Buena Vista is a promenade, and we get people bicycling, skateboarding on that piece of property, and it's all supposed to, and they've got little bicycles with lines through them painted on the cement, but the bicycles go through anyway. So we are asking that the enforcement take place not only for the boardwalk, but all the streets along the Balboa Peninsula. The speed limit needs to be enforced, and it's more than 30 years ago that my sister was hit by a bicycle on the boardwalk and almost killed, so that I understand what bicycle speed does on that stretch of cement. We also would like to say that aggressive police enforcement should be carried out and continued. I've seen Surreys go up and down Bay Avenue and having a good time, and they don't seem to be in anybody's car path, and they're still sober and pedaling, and the families are having a good time. So Bay is a street that they can go up and down without too much worry. So I would encourage that for Surreys. I would like to put in a personal statement that as an old maid school teacher, bicycles are vehicles. And what bothers me more is when I come down Balboa Boulevard and these bicycles are demanding that they believe that pedestrian means pedal, and it's the pedal on their bicycle, and they wish to be riding across the pedestrian zone in the middle of Balboa Boulevard. This is another problem that we deal with on the peninsula. People demanding that they are a pedestrian when they are a vehicle. So that we're asking for that enforcement also to take place, so people are not hitting bicyclists that just pop out as trying to be pedestrians. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I'll bring it back to the council. Councilwoman Gardner?
Well, this is really a localized problem, because I know that Balboa Island, you just don't see bicycles. At least I haven't when I'm on the sidewalk. You get a few in Corona Del Mar just trying to avoid Coast Highway, but they ride slowly. I mean, they're just trying to make their way from one area to the other. So this is very much a local area. And it seems to me that the two issues, the parking, the obstruction of the sidewalk should be an easy issue to deal with. I mean, seems to me a no-brainer. But I'm wondering, as far as the speed, if we couldn't do what we did at Big Corona along Ocean Boulevard and have a period where we do a little shock treatment and put some resources down there and see if we can get control of it. I'm also wondering if it might not be vandalized, but to put one of our little speed signs, our flashing speed sign, the 8 mile per hour, just to remind people that there is a speed limit. I say it might get vandalized because people don't jump out of their cars to do it, and they might there, but it's something at least to consider, because I do think that people don't necessarily see the sign. Some do, and they're scofflaws, but a lot of people just don't realize that they're supposed to drive as slowly as they do.
Okay, Councilman Hen? Oh, Councilman Webb.
Well, a gentleman reminded me of something when he said a passive way of determining the speed, and I'm now going back to probably about 1975 or 76 when the gentleman who ran against me, Alan Beek, was on the Bike Trails Committee, and this issue was being discussed at that time, and his suggestion was that you take a playing card and a clothespin, which we don't have clothespins anymore, and you tape it on the back of the bike, and then you train the policemen to where when they hear the click get too fast, that they write them a ticket. Now, I think that it was turned down because they were afraid of the noise that it might produce on the sidewalk on a continuous basis, but Mr. Beek was very serious when he made that suggestion. I just thought I would throw that out.
Okay. Councilman Hen?
I'm struck by the actual diversity of comments about the problem. Some people are very troubled by Surreys, others less so. I think everybody's troubled by the skateboards. I'd have to say we have increased enforcement from time to time, and with the idea of having a little bit of a shock treatment. I do recollect last summer, though, I had gotten home, and this was after asking the police to step up enforcement. I looked out my bedroom window, and here's two of the cutest little 11-year-old girls sitting on the bench with a policeman talking to them, crying their eyes out. That wasn't the image in my mind of tough enforcement. But it is kind of an illustration of the difficulty of dealing with this issue. Now, we also haven't heard from any business owners here, and business owners are entitled to have a view of this as well. They've been doing business, and rightly or wrongly. And so I guess what I'd like to do is ask staff, if appropriate, the police department, to come back with a plan to me to organize a community outreach effort on this, where we can bring together concerned citizens, business owners, and if there's some way to do it, visitors. I'm not so sure that's easy to do. There are probably some people that don't care too much about that end of it, but in any event, I would like to do some outreach here to see if there's a possibility of reaching some sort of a consensus about change in regulation and increased enforcement. Enforcement is a personnel and cost issue, but maybe we've got some ideas that are worthwhile. Maybe the police can put their minds to it, or staff, and make some good suggestions in that respect that really haven't been surfaced yet. So I would really like to do that. This is a problem that is just chronic, and I think it is getting worse, but frankly it's hard to really tell for sure. And so I'd like to do that. I'd like to be helpful with that. I do appreciate my fellow council members' patience on this issue, because it is pretty much a peninsula issue. But nevertheless, I'd like to do that, so would appreciate that. And would be glad to help with the organization of it.
Okay, Councilman Webb.
Mr. Yen, it seems like that we perhaps ought to also have our code enforcement people visit some of the renters of these Surrey cycles to review what they really are doing, and maybe, like was suggested, the boardwalk is a holdover from when the oceanfront sidewalk actually was boards. Maybe we need to call it the oceanfront sidewalk, or something that is more clearly obvious to the person that's renting a bike. Plus, I really think that our code enforcement people should be as strict as they possibly can to keep the Surrey cycles from being stored on the sidewalk in front of the rental, or in Palm Street. That's not, shouldn't be an acceptable item.
I sure support those comments, and I guess one thing we could do is change it to a real boardwalk with some warped boards or something. That might be a passive restraint, but in any event, but I would like to make sure that this group is inclusive, and we really do need to make some change here. The status quo really is not acceptable, and it's a hard one to figure out what's the right kind of change, but we need to make change.
Okay, thank you. Just one comment on Councilwoman Gardner's comment. If there is a bicycle on the Balboa Island sidewalk on the bayfront, I hear about it very quickly.
I think we had an email on that relatively recently.
Yes, we did. Okay, so staff, we have enough direction on that? Okay, next item on our agenda is the Underground Assessment District Status Report and Guiding Principle Review.
Good evening, Council, Mayor. We're happy to bring you basically a presentation tonight in regard to our guiding principles on assessment districts that we develop. Iris Lee will be handing out a couple handouts for you tonight. You'll have a copy of the PowerPoint that we'll be presenting. We also have the guiding principles that we've developed, and that's the one double-sided sheet of white paper. And we also have a map for you, too, that has all the various assessment districts going on and their various status. And we have a short PowerPoint for you tonight, and then we'll take some questions from you. Just take a second to warm up here.
One of each, huh?
Here it comes up. As you're aware, the City of Newport Beach has been doing several assessment districts over the years, and this goes forward, I believe. This is just a summary of the recent ones we've been doing. There's several assessment districts on here, and actually goes back further than this, years and years. But the most recent assessment districts are on here, and it gives you some background information. The last three on this, 80, 87, 8103, and 8100, are in the process right now. They actually have not been formed. We just recently formed 8099 and 8101. So you can see kind of the evaluation and the various things. The note here is the methodology that we kind of are talking about tonight on the fifth column over. And the methodology's been all over the board basically in past districts, and that was one of the points that kind of led us to tonight's discussion. We've had, as you know, when we set up an assessment district, there's characteristics in the assessment engineer per state law decides on what the base of the assessment district is going to be and the benefit factors that will be used to represent that district. And in the past, we've had base values based on parcel size. We've had zoning. We've had frontage, modified frontage, equal spread across the various parcels. It's kind of been a mixed bag, and it has brought up some questions on how we come about that. Benefit factors have been in the safety, reliability, and aesthetics are generally the benefit factors we've used. There are some various offshoots over the years that have appeared. What we've done is we've developed basically a new guiding principles format, and that's the white piece of paper I handed out to you. And the emphasis behind this was kind of trying to standardize our assessment districts because they generally occur in residential areas, maybe some mixed-use areas, but generally in residential, and they tend to be a little homogeneous. There are some side shoots that we have to deal with on the various areas, but we can do that through the benefit factors. We wanted to develop general guidelines to provide a degree of consistency for future districts. We also had to keep enough openness in it so the assessment district can incorporate the various factors to account for the exceptions in the district per state law. But we also want to incorporate a simplified methodology so the general public can understand it and it's not too complicated, it makes sense, and also a sense of fairness in that. what we've come up with basically, and we feel this is the best approach, is to have a consistent base factor based on parcel size. We found parcel size basically is a uniform factor that affects everybody. Basically, the larger the parcel, the greater the assessment, but also the greater the benefit. Typically, it's tied to real estate values. It has to do with if you can occupy a parcel with so many folks, maybe 2 residents or 1 resident. If we go on a parcel size basis, it kind of spreads that out on an even factor. We also want to base it on the highest and best use of the parcel. So we would look at parcels, if they're undeveloped, to be fully developed when we do the assessment, because that would be the highest and best use of that parcel. The benefit factors we're looking at, basically, we're going to start with them all being weighed equally. It'd be a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 benefit factor. And the first one would be connection benefit. And that would be anybody who can connect to the district would be assessed the connection benefit. That seems simple, but we actually have some districts where you're in the district, you have overhead lines in front of you, but you're connected behind you, or you've actually undergrounded into a prior district. So that benefit may be applied or maybe not if you're not connected into that district. The second one would be our safety aspect, and we're looking at that as basically there's a degree of safety provided with any kind of district. You can, obviously, windstorms or anything like that, we can knock down poles, they can fall and catch fire. We can have property damage by falling on houses or automobiles. So the thought on that is that if you're basically adjacent to or in the proximity of a pole that can cause a safety factor, you'll be assessed a safety benefit. The third one is aesthetics, and there's a lot of discussion on that, but basically on the aesthetic side, we felt that when you come into a district, everybody benefits from an aesthetic value. The area is generally cleaned up, and as you drive through, you have some aesthetic appreciation, and the market value of your house also goes up because the whole area has been cleaned up. There could be some exceptions on that where your aesthetic value is much greater. You may have a Bayview or something, and you might have a slightly higher assessment. That would be something we'd look at. But on a general, you'd start off with a 1/3, and everybody be assessed that. So that's kind of where we are in the guiding principles. We wanted to introduce that and give you the option to maybe ask some questions on that. I also have our team here tonight. We have with us tonight Eddie Marquez and Tony Mathis of Southern California Edison. And we have over here Mark Rush with AT&T. And then our staff folks, our Assistant City Engineer Mike Sinacore, who's basically our assessment engineer. He's our prime contact on that, is with us tonight. Iris Lee, you've seen many times. She's on many of the assessment districts. And then also Joan Cox is an assessment engineer who's worked with us extensively, and we have her available for questions tonight. So with that, we'd like to talk, if you have any questions on guiding principles, or if you wanted to talk about any of the schedules or current things going on within the assessment districts, we're open to that too. And we turn it over to you for questions tonight.
Okay. Any questions, members of the council? Councilman Hunt?
Yeah, so these benefit factors, I'm presuming that we want to make clear that we're starting with the presumption that they're all equal for every property, and that we only deviate from that presumption when there is specific evidence as to a piece of property that there's a difference.
That's how we would start. They'd all be 1/3 each, equaling up to a full assessment of 1. And the assessment engineer would go through and make evaluation. In some cases, we will have, for instance, I mentioned connection. If they're not connected within the district, they're connected outside, we would maybe eliminate that third of it. Or if they have a heightened aesthetic, a superior view compared to everybody else, and removing that, they may have a little higher aesthetic value.
Well, see, that last comment is part of what bothers me a little bit. We can slice the hair too fine on this, I think, and so I'm looking for a generalized view that it has to be a material deviation before we really start to, be making fine divisions here. And so I can understand, like in 99, where you've got a grade school and a church, and those are obvious parcels that need to be adjusted for. But, my encouragement is let's keep it as simple as possible unless there is a commanding reason to do otherwise. Now, would that be an unfair statement to work into your guiding principles?
No, actually, I think we could address that. I can't think of a particular case that, aesthetics would be so overwhelming, but any thoughts on that?
Council. I'm Joan Cox with Harrison Associates. A lot of times just to talk about your view enhancement, let's call it that benefit. A lot of times I use something to quantify that. When we're looking at hillside properties, right now the districts we're doing for you are pretty much flat, and that's really not coming into consideration. But I do a lot of projects up north, and in the hills of Piedmont, the hills of Tiburon, Belvedere. Those are serious hillside properties, and the properties are looking out across to San Francisco, and these wires and poles are actually being brought down, and it is enhancing their view of the Bay Area. So in that case, we actually are using some factor for that. In a flat area, we really don't see that, so I don't see that becoming an issue here on the districts we have right now in front of us. Does that help?
Well, it's my understanding that these, in fact, are guiding principles. In fact, the city's guiding principles, and they don't necessarily have legal effect as it relates to the assessment district laws. But for that reason, I think probably we can incorporate a little more play into what we write down than if it were a matter of legal impact. And I think it's very useful. It's useful for the residents when they're looking at those guiding principles to get a better sense. And it's useful, I would think, for consulting engineers that we would interview. You've had a lot of experience with Newport Beach, but I'm presuming that, we have others that haven't and whatnot. And just to make sure everybody understands what the general attitude is about getting too complicated. Engineers typically have a tremendous capability to deal with detail and fine gradations, and that doesn't play well with ordinary citizens that are just trying to figure out, gee, intuitively, does this generally make sense? And that's where we run into a lot of trouble on these assessment districts. So with regard to the topography thing, so maybe there could be a statement incorporated in there that says the aesthetics will be considered to be of equal value unless topographical conditions command otherwise. Do you see what I mean? I'd like to get a little more guidance and flavor in here about keeping it simple.
But Mike, could I ask a question of you? I'm sorry to interrupt, but okay, I don't have a view of the ocean, but I have a view of the pole. And if that pole's removed, even though it's not a topographical thing, that's still improving my view. That's an aesthetic benefit. You're not discounting that.
But I think in general, in a situation like that, everybody's view is improved in that area around that pole to some greater or lesser extent. And the question is, do we really want to take the time and trouble to make a special differentiation in the calculation for that? So that's the direction that I'm headed. I don't disagree with you about that. It's a question of, is that generally enough of an issue in a flat area? Safety's another one like that. I mean, it's awfully hard. If a pole, I have a pole right behind my house. That pole could fall down and hit 4 other houses maybe, and not mine. And so the pole happens to be right behind my house. Is that a reason that I should get an extra safety benefit? Maybe not.
And that's the real challenge and what we tried to do. Staff tried to put something together to give guidance to folks like Joan, the assessment engineers, to say the city would like to start with these and kind of level the playing field, but not yet completely remove your right as the assessment engineer under the law to tweak it to make it. She has to find fair and partial judgment on these numbers. So I think, for instance, on the aesthetics, it really was in my mind, I'm thinking, on a general flat area like the peninsula, maybe everybody have the same aesthetics, but if you had homes on the water that actually had a pole line running in front, they may have just a slightly higher tweak because the aesthetic value to them is probably higher, again, in the assessment engineer's value. But to what degree is the detail that we're always struggling with? Is it just a notch above it? Is it double? Is it a quarter of it? And I think we could add some language and try to tighten that up a little bit more. But then I don't want to infringe too much on the law area where I'm actually dictating to the assessment engineer that this is how it's going to be. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, maybe Robin could make a comment. I don't think it was my intention to try and dictate. I don't think we can do that, but we can provide a better philosophical balance.
Yes, I think if you look at the assessment district law from a historical perspective, what happened, I believe it was during the passage, or after the passage of 218, the assessment standard went from a general benefit to a specific benefit. And so an assessment engineer is required to identify if there's a specific benefit to a property that other properties might have, that you can't generally spread the cost of that benefit over other property owners that may not receive the same benefit. So I think that starting out with the general principle of equal and then coming up with maybe more specific direction along the lines, except for when topographical or other factors come into play where there is a more specific benefit to some properties rather than others, maybe that might be a suggested language that might help in that. And then that would be the limitation on when they go from the kind of the general assessment benefit and to more specific.
Councilman Curry was next.
Yeah. How does everybody else do it? I mean, how does this approach compare to how other assessment districts are determined in California?
They vary all across the board, council member, all across the board. So, I mean, just in your own city, we've seen a huge amount of variety. You multiply that by multiple different types of assessment engineers. Every assessment engineer, unfortunately, we all have our own points of view. Engineers do that. It's our perspective, it's our, basically we're putting our license and saying that it is appropriate and it's according to special benefit that these properties are receiving the special benefit and this is how and that they are specially benefited. Every assessment engineer will look at it slightly differently. Every public agency will have a slight take on what's appropriate for their city. So we work with all of the cities, each public agency. We work with the community. We try and work something that will work with both the assessment engineer and the community to make it work for that community and for that neighborhood and for that council in particular.
Yeah, but this sounds like it's more art than science, I suppose, right?
Afraid so.
And really, we're trying to pick between impressionist and modern, I suppose, is sort of the...
But I actually think that the guiding principles you have in front of you is a very good way to start. And I know, our original District 99, it was extremely complex, and I had a lot of things that I needed to look at, which made it complex. We were able to streamline that, make it better. This is kind of looking at what we did with 99-2. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's what we're going to try and apply here on out with the districts we see coming up. Looking at aesthetics, with view and aesthetics, I actually separate the two. An enhanced view, I have a completely separate benefit factor if it applies, so it's not the same as aesthetics, so it's a little bit different. So that's how I work that. So, working with the community, working with you if something like that comes up, and making sure y'all are comfortable with it.
Sounds dangerously close to splitting hairs to me.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, Councilman Davis next.
Thanks for putting together the framework. I think it demonstrates progress, and I always try to remember that good isn't the enemy of perfect, and I think it seems to be unclear that there ever is a perfect solution, but I think we can kind of move along and be open to tweaking it as things come up. My question is, looking at these pending projects, what do you anticipate as the barriers to implementation? I know we have Edison, we have funding. I mean, what do you see trying to get these in place that we're going to be struggling with?
I think there's a host of barriers. This hopefully takes care of one of them, and as we pointed out, as we've gone down the peninsula, for instance, it's pretty much uniform residential, some commercial in there, and it doesn't make sense to have all kinds of different ways to do it. So we try to take that issue out, which kind of came up in 99 a little bit. We had a little discussion about that. We had to look at our format. There are some barriers, and maybe Edison can touch on that. We are having some resource issues right now. We were trying to move a couple districts forward, and the schedules are slipping a little bit because there just aren't enough resources to attack that. Funding can be an issue. It can be a struggle right now. It sounds like the cost from when we originally started doing these districts has gone up significantly along with all our construction costs, and it's making the residents think a little more about that. I think 99 was the closest vote we've had in a while, and maybe that's starting to play in a factor. At some point it might get too expensive to take these districts on depending on the will of the folks. So there's those two big ones right now. But if you'd like to explore the Edison one, I know that's really kind of hitting us right now. Mike Sinacori's been doing a great job trying to keep them moving, but 87 is one of those projects we're having that's kind of slipping a little, and also 100 is those two districts are possibly moving out on the schedules as we provided you because of that resource issue.
Great, thank you. I would be interested at some point, when appropriate, hearing from Edison as to what they consider the barriers to implementation.
Councilman Webb?
Yeah, I think that on the issue of aesthetics, I look at the various different assessment districts we've had, and a lot of them are flat, but like, for instance, 92, which, did you do 92? Okay. That was one where it is on the hillside, it's up around above the Mariners Mile area, and if you look at District 57, which is Corona Highlands, I remember that that was a whole series of areas that are stacked on top of each other, and there definitely is some significant aesthetic benefits. So there are areas within the community where that does need to make perhaps a difference in there. And I guess this is hard to come up with a general statement, but once we get going and we have the estimate, it seems like it does take forever to get the plans drawn by Edison and the phone company. Is there any way that we can shorten that process at all? You mentioned that a shortage of resources. Now, does this mean that when we put some money up front for design, that they don't assign the personnel to do the design soon enough or quick enough?
You know, I'm going to ask the utilities to talk that. I know they've had a lot of retirements and changing of folks and just a workload issue, but maybe, Eddie, if you could touch on that, that'd be great.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, Council, staff, Eddie Marquez with the Edison Company. Like any other company, we have finite resources, and this city is the most impacted city when it comes to Rule 20 projects. We have them all across our territory, but in Orange County, of all of the crews that we have, 4 of our crews are dedicated specifically in this area. I also brought a colleague with me. Tony Mathis is our Rule 20 project manager, and he's our senior manager, so he has more of the technical answers and the technical know-how. But like most companies, we have finite resources there, and realistically what's happening is they're starting to catch up to us. We have many, many projects that we've worked on you with here, and we've got 87 now coming down the pike. We're meeting with residents on Thursday. We have a meeting. Mike Sinacori with you has done a great job of working with Edison and trying to get things scheduled, but we had a situation where we were going to schedule a project, and the person that was in charge of the scheduling was set to retire. They left a little earlier than we thought they were going to leave. There was nothing we can do with that. We did commit to the city that we were going to have that position backfilled. We backfilled it as soon as we could, and we're moving forward. We have a meeting, like I said, on Thursday with Mike and a couple of the residents. We're ready to move forward on that. Tony, is there anything that you'd like to add, since you have a little more of the technical know-how here? If you can come up to the podium. Okay. If there are any specific questions, maybe.
Yeah, I have one since
Sure,
87's in my district. I've been on the council 3.5 years, and I know there's been at least 7 6-month slips in the schedule. And the people in Balboa Island are angry right now over it. They've seen the cost estimates on this from when it initiated go through the roof, and maybe going on so long might be to their benefit, because maybe they'll start coming down. I guess my question is, how or why not, or maybe that's not the right way to phrase it, why can't the city, if we're paying for the design, why can't we contract with outside engineers? If you're resource challenged, why can't we contract with outside engineers to get these designs done, where we have control of the schedule and the project, and we get it to you for checking? Why can't we do that?
I think you can. Tony, can you answer that, please?
Yes, I'm Tony Mathis with Edison. Well, there's a couple, let me respond to that in a couple different ways. Number one, our tariff does not have a provision in it for allowing others to design our Rule 20A or Rule 20B projects. The design is done by Edison. We have a number of contracts with design firms. If there are any resources out there that are capable and qualified to design this work, I would absolutely love to hear about them, because we've engaged, I think we have about 10 to 12 contracts with other design firms to do this work. The Rule 20 undergrounding actually happens to be some of the most complex work that we do. As a matter of fact, that's stated in our general rate case application for the testimony with regard to Rule 20. They are the most complex projects. Consequently, the design is typically done by more experienced planners and designers. Many of the planners that are working for these design contractors happen to be retired Edison planners. The reason, again, that they are very experienced, they know the work, they've retired from Edison, but are now working for some of these other design contractors. So we are somewhat resource constrained, even from a design perspective, but we are engaging and trying to secure as many resources as we can externally, and much of the work is performed by contract design companies. So if there's any other design companies out there, chances are we would have already snagged them, and if there are any, I'd certainly like to hear about them.
So if we can find them, we can use them.
Well, again, it points back to the tariff that the work is to be performed by Edison, with the exception of the construction of the ducts and structures, which actually the tariff states that the customer is to provide the ducts and structures to Edison per our design. However, the applicant has the option of having Edison perform the work at our estimated cost.
So you're saying if we find an engineer, because of the tariff, you have to hire them, they have to be under contract to you and not to the city? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Yeah, I would just say that with the slowdown in subdivision work out there, I know there's a lot of consultants that I've used that do subdivision work. I'd have to think a lot of these guys are not doing a lot of work right now and might be available to do some of this work. Councilman Webb, did you have
It's a
something
little
else?
different type work than what most consultants are involved in. I guess my next question would be, we've heard from Edison, it's my experience in the past that sometimes our delays are even longer with the telephone companies as far as the designs. Telephone can't get started until Edison finishes, is that correct?
That's correct. Typically, we do our designs based on...
State your name, too, when you come up.
Mark Rush with AT&T. I'm an engineer. And typically, our designs are based on the Edison design. We do go in joint trench with them, and they're the lead agency. We have the same tariff restrictions that Edison has. And as far as contracting out engineering resources, we do have an approved contract vending list that we use. And the rationale for that is we do need to have qualified engineering done. And so typically on the Rule 20s, we do the engineering ourselves. And
I guess that this is what one of the things that I've always seen as an extra delay. It would be nice if we had some Edison engineers that could learn what the phone engineers and vice versa do, to where they could be doing the design at the same time instead of separately. Because anytime you design a project where everybody, or the first person has to get completely done before the second person starts, it takes longer.
well, that's true, but the benefits to that are the cost overall is minimized because you're using a joint trench, and
I'm assuming that can be done. The problem is the designs is what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I realize the construction gets done at the same time,
right,
approximately, but it's the designs that I'm concerned about, trying to be coordinated better.
Exactly. Did you want to?
Yeah, ma'am. Councilman Webb, Edison generally will do the design of our facilities first. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're typically called the lead trenching party. But we will design our facilities first. They happen to be typically more extensive and larger than the other utilities. Some of our vaults are typically, and manholes can be 6 by 7 feet. Space in the street is critical to us sometimes because of other existing facilities. So we're generally the first ones to go in and do the first design because our facilities are typically more extensive and require more space. So we will do our design, the layout, lay out the trench location based on the base maps. And then once we've laid out our facilities and we provide the preliminary design to the city and then the other utilities, they can then go in and design their facilities around ours. So they will design them in the same trench line, but they will design their structures adjacent to ours in the same trench line. And, of course, we have the allowed or required clearances between structures because we have to maintain minimum clearances. So it's not something that typically, well, it's not something that's been designed in parallel. We will go in first, lay out our facilities, and then the other utilities will follow suit. I believe, well, that's the same process for our Rule 28 projects, and I can find out from our peer utilities whether or not they're following the same process, peer utilities being SDG&E and PG&E, but I would think their processes are probably pretty similar.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question.
Go ahead.
How many districts you got lined up in terms of what your crew handles?
How many districts? We're talking assessment districts. Lined up. Could you help me better understand the question?
How many in line, in the queue to do?
Well, I don't have the detailed information with me. I have the project manager that I know has worked very closely with Mike.
What about how many?
Patrick,
1,000 in Southern California?
Oh, are we talking about
yeah.
total?
Right.
I think we probably have about 30.
30 districts. And
Yes.
how many people working on it?
It's a number of different organizations. I couldn't pull together a number. But we have a number of internal folks, internal planners, contract planners and designers. It's a fair number of individuals. I just couldn't even begin to pull a number.
Okay. Do you think Edison is giving this part of the operation enough attention? I mean, it can't be real profitable doing this.
Well, it's not a question of profit because we don't earn a profit on any of the work we do per se. All our costs booked to plan are based on actual cost. So there is no profit. There's no profit in the assessment districts. There's no profit in our other capital work. We do earn a rate of return when we build assets per the commission. But we're not doing this for profitability. We do I think, a very fair share of the assessment districts. And again, I think as was stated earlier, is that Newport Beach probably has the most aggressive program, and we have the most projects in queue for the city of Newport Beach. One of your neighbors down south, Laguna Beach, is also quite active. Now, one thing that Laguna Beach has done, and they find this more workable for them, is they do install their own duct and structure systems themselves and deed them to us, and that seems to have worked for them quite well.
Okay. Well, I think the interest that you're hearing from the city to supplement your resources somehow, I think is really, I think, an approach to consider. The concern being that, without profitability, it's not getting the attention that we're looking for from Edison.
Now, let me emphasize it's not an issue of profitability for us. The relationship we have with our cities is very important, and the relationship with Newport Beach as a city is very important. We are doing our best, trying to put our best foot forward. With regard to District 87, I personally elevated the issue of resources up the flagpole a number of levels, and it got some very high attention. And so we are now moving forward. So I think we're back on track, and we have a schedule that I understand is mutually agreeable with your staff, and we're moving forward to get the bid pricing for District 87.
Councilman Webb, did you have anything else?
On Rule 20A, maybe Steve knows this answer, but I noticed that we have two projects out there, one on Superior and one on San Joaquin. Does Edison have any money to spend on those? What's our status of those two?
I think we're mortgaged way out on those. We just finished
Bayside Drive.
Bayside Drive, so I think we have several years before we can bank enough funds to move forward with any of the 28s.
Okay.
Okay, Councilman Hen?
Yeah, just one more question, though, on the issue of cost. I'd like to understand whether you now have a standard policy to competitively bid the work that's being done. My understanding is that we've made some progress in achieving competitive bidding on this. Is that now the way you ordinarily do things?
Another Tony question.
Yes, there has been a little bit of a change, or somewhat of a change. I'll point back to the tariff. The tariff required us to provide an estimate, and that estimate of the work became our bid to the city to do the project. What we do now, when we physically go out and do the underground civil, we do and have always bid the work. or at least in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years that I can recall. We don't have our own Edison underground civil construction crew, so we competitively bid that work. But what we've done as of maybe about 18 months ago, we modified our policy internally so that we go out for bid and solicit bids for the underground civil portion, hold those bids open for a period of time such that we can provide our bid pricing to the city, which incorporates that bid pricing, and allow enough time such that you can go through your assessment phase, go to vote, receive approval or disapproval, and if the project's approved, we can then award the contract. So going out for actual market bids takes a lot of the uncertainty out of our pricing, and I think it's kind of win-win, which is why we modified that process.
On another point on that, and then I'll stop, this issue of prevailing wage. Have we worked that out? Is that a required component of your bidding, prevailing wage, or we're a charter city? I don't know that we're as constrained as others. Where does that issue sit? I've sort of lost track of that one.
I think that may be a question that can be better answered by our procurement or supply chain management folks. My understanding is our terms and conditions included in our bids is that the contractors are to pay the appropriate wages for the job. So our contract is essentially somewhat silent to whether or not it's specifically prevailing wage. We leave it up to the contractor to bid based on the appropriate wages that are to be paid for the project. If we'd like a more specific answer, we'd have to take that back to our supply chain folks.
It would help me to have a more specific answer. That doesn't seem to be very definitive.
Well, I think the last time I was there was probably about 9 months ago, and council, the city attorney's office I'd worked with in the past. It was my understanding from the decision that was handed down that it's up to the discretion of the city. If the city wants to enforce a prevailing wage statute, then they can, but it's not for us to decide, us being the utility. So if there's a prevailing wage mandate, it's up to the city to decide whether they're going to ask their contractors to either implement or not implement prevailing wage.
So what do we ask them to do, Steve or Dave?
We certainly don't ask them to give us prevailing wage. I think we're more or less silent on that.
My recollection is we've never required prevailing wage be made on the undergroundings, that it was the Edison or the undergrounding agency that made that decision, and that changed. There was many years when we didn't do it. So, and then that changed, and so I think if they made the decision that they were no longer going to specifically require it, then we're not requiring it, then my guess is the bids are not going out with prevailing wages. But I don't know that for a fact.
And
Yeah,
we don't see their
guess may be
contract, so
inaccurate.
we're not sure what's in their contract.
Yeah, so perhaps we can get a little more proactive on that issue to make sure people understand where we are. That might be helpful, too.
Mr. Mayor, I do have one assessment district that I'd like to call your attention to, and this item and map gives me an opportunity to do that, and that is Assessment District number 19 in Santa Ana Heights. And I just want to let you know, and just a little history on this, when this is a county redevelopment agency project, and when Supervisor Silva represented this district, he agreed that the connections on private property would be covered by the assessment district. That is no longer what Supervisor Morlock intends to do, and because of that, we have had to re-engineer the project to where it just basically contains undergrounding on public property, and then on private property, it's going to be up to the property owner. But I point that out to you because when there wasn't a vote on the district because it was all going to be paid for by the county. So now the property owners are going to have some say-so on whether they want to underground their private property or not. And I just fear that the council is going to be caught into that issue because when we first talked to the property owners, it was the position of the county that the whole project was going to be covered with county funds. Now they're going to feel like we went back on them. It isn't we went back on them, but the rules changed at the county level.
So that was going to be done with redevelopment funds, correct?
That's correct.
So what is the choice for the property owners then, whether to go to a 20B rule for private connections, or dump the whole project, or what? It's not a 20B project, it's a 20A project.
It isn't a 20B project, and we are trying to figure out a way that we can get a sense of the property owners in the area to decide how to move forward. But what is going to take place is there is going to be an underground assessment district. I think it's going to be on public property. The question is, what happens on private
So
property?
you're saying now the county's not going to do that portion under redevelopment funds?
That's right. They're going to do the public, not the private.
Yeah, the portion in the street, they're still going to do. They're going to pay for the bulk of it. It's really just the hookup that everybody pays elsewhere.
That's true, but there are some big properties in that district. There are some long lines that would have to be run on private property. It is going to be an issue with a number of folks. Okay.
But wouldn't part of their sort of criticism be directed at the county, though? I mean, it seems like it's Supervisor Warlock's decision.
We could only hope.
Well, one would hope so.
Can we get Supervisor Warlock to come down?
You know, we took all the credit when it was a private, but now we have this issue.
I guess I'm confused. Is this Santa Ana Heights money a 20A project or a 20B project? Because there's a whole lot of difference between the two.
It's actually a 20B with
Okay.
the redevelopment money paying the
Okay, so
the
it's
share.
incorrectly shown on the map here. Does anybody?
It's similar to a 20, I know.
Does the rest of the council know the difference
Yes,
between
it's
20A
like a
and
B.
20B? 20A is using money that the Edison company, or maybe Edison can describe that.
Really briefly, the 20A is public money that's allocated for specific public projects. The B is paid for by private money. And in this case, it sounds like City Manager Bludow is saying that the county was going to use RDA funds to pay for that, and hence it was a B.
What's 20C?
There actually is a 20C,
I know,
Mr. Mayor,
that's
but
what
I
I'm
don't want to
saying.
confuse the.
Okay.
There's a 20D too. It's all of the above. Yes.
In other words, usually the 20A money is something that the Edison that the city is able to put together projects in which the Edison are funds that come through Edison from, I don't know what source it is, but some of your taxes.
It's ratepayer money, yes.
Yeah, it's ratepayer money that we are allocated so much per year. In the past, we've been allocated so much per year, and I'm not sure if that's still going
Based on
on.
overhead meters, yes.
It's about $500,000 a year we get allocated, and we can mortgage out on projects on that.
We've done a
Which
very
we
good
have.
job of mortgaging in
We are
advance,
mortgaged
if I
out.
remember correctly.
Councilwoman Daigle.
One more question, Homer. I just want to make sure I understand this. So is the Santa Ana Heights project now kind of a two-pronged project where we have a 20A and then we have a 20B?
I think what's going to happen is that the public property undergrounding is going to be done. And the question is going to be for each property owner as to whether they want to participate on their private property. So there may be a number of private property owners who have lines stretching from the underground, which is going to cause some issues because there immediately needs to be maybe a new pole erected to connect from the undergrounding to the overhead in order to continue providing overhead service to the private properties. And Steve, if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Let's hear the engineers figure that one out from an aesthetic standpoint.
Councilman, maybe I can clarify a little bit. This council in 2005 approved that assessment district, and it was a 20B district, except that basically the city made the vote. You provided the money through the RDA funds, and we moved forward with the district. As you approved that district, you cited that the private hookups, some of them could be upwards of $20,000 per property, since they're so long, that you were going to pay that through RDA funds. That's since now changed, and the public hasn't had its due process to protest those decisions. So we're going to figure out a mechanism to get the word out, have probably another public hearing in front of you so they can air their concerns, and if there's a large protest, maybe we do abandon the district, or you would abandon that district. So it's more to come on that. We haven't decided quite how to get that to you, but it is an issue. Some of these are, like I said, $20,000.
Certainly, this throws a monkey wrench into things, to say the least, and I'd be interested in working with you on some ideas on the due process, so people feel like their opinions are heard.
Absolutely.
Okay, Councilwoman David, you had a question from the telephone company representative?
That's fine.
Okay. Any other questions? I'll just point out one thing.
Are we going to have public comment?
Yeah, we will. But I just wanted to point out one thing, that if you look at this schedule, that if they stay on the schedule that's here, the Balboa Island District Number 87 will take 11 years to complete from the day it was started.
And that may be about as long as 69.
Yeah, I think 69 has the
68.
record.
11 years.
I think our district in Newport Shores took well over 10 years, 10, 15 years.
Okay, I'll open it for public comment. Anybody wish to address the council on assessment districts?
Everybody mentions Rule 20. Rule 20 was enacted 41 years ago. Looking at this city, it recognized by adding Chapter 15.332, underground utilities, looking at your map and knowing what's going on. I've been involved to practice electrical engineering since '67. I've done design work for a municipality. It's not a municipal utility on some of their underground. We're behind the curve. If you go look at San Diego's website, there you went before the CUP and got an increase in the tariff. They are hoping to be completed by the year 2030. They have a lot of projects that people want to expedite, so they're using Rule 20B to go ahead. Rising costs and all that have been a big factor, and I think this has really stirred up a lot of talk. It's been a tough one to sell to people over the years because, you know, it's not advertised on TV. It has to be the local entity that's servicing it and whatnot. In reference to this special, or the guiding principles for assessment district benefits draft, I would like to say, from what we went through in AD 101, I was preparing for a lawsuit. It was ridiculous. That, Iris, did you write this or put this together? If she was in my real estate economics class when I was teaching in the community colleges, she would have gotten an A+. I have a 3-inch binder that I'm going to go home and put in file 13. I have as many of the engineer reports from the city of Newport Beach, and this is the most equal, beneficial. The front footage, modified front footage, they really weren't treated square. In AD 101, if we'd gone through with the first deal, I was going to ask you to increase my assessment $76 because I believe in the square footage approach. With what we ended up, I would have been back here, but I said, to heck with it. I'm glad it's hopefully going to pass from the indication we had in the street. I would have asked for a credit of $120-some. One of the interesting things, and I'm reading this from Ms. Cox's report in 99.2, you, the City Council, are the final authority in evaluating the engineer's report. And one of the things that troubles me is in the state constitution where this law is found, it provides that only special benefits are accessible and the local agency levying the assessment, but separate the general benefits from the special benefits. Down here, the City Council must make the final determination whether or not the assessment spread has been made in direct proportion to the special benefits received by each parcel within the assessment district. At your August 14th, 07 study session, looking at the minutes, there were two things that brought up that I've highlighted and been waiting for the opportunity to bring up. One of them, council member, and I don't pick you out here, in the division or the petition process had suggested a $1,500 fee. The other thing is, and why it's not been addressed, I appreciate the city attorney, believe that the engineer needs to look at whether there's a general benefit versus specific benefit, and whether the benefit is for the property, city, or utility. Now, if you go in, and I picked this up, I can't find it on the Utility Commission's website. I found it on the San Diego deal and linked onto it. The CPUC balances undergrounding benefits with fairness and cost, require clear general public benefits, and it's to avoid undue burden on the ratepayers. Now, under here's something else maybe Edison can answer later on. The applicant pays for the entire cost, excluding transformers and meters, of the new underground system, less an amount equal to the cost of a new overhead system of equivalent capacity. Several places I have found in regards to this general benefit. Most importantly, I have this documentation. I'll be happy to give you a copy of it, to give you this package. Is California Constitution, Article 13D, Section 2I, general enhancement of property value does not constitute special benefit. Now, I have mentioned City of San Diego. City of San Diego, of course, they've got plenty of revenue from various things and whatnot, but they're creating or paying a substantial portion as a general benefit to the city. Now,
can you wrap it up? Your time's expired.
Well, I'll be happy to go to the grand jury. Give me another 5 minutes, possibly.
You won't have 5 more minutes, but just kind of wrap it up, please.
If you look at your cost estimates, construction costs, I feel, are specific to the property. The financing costs, those that select to pay on a bond, they are given credit for that expense. Incidental expenses is a general benefit to the whole city, and it should come out of the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make 2 other comments, please?
Make it real quick, please.
Okay, one of the things, in 101, we have properties that have been assessed twice, and they're only getting 1 stub out, and they're on 2 legal parcels. 99, I understand, every parcel is getting a stub out. What this is going to happen in 101, if somebody comes by and buys those 2 lots, tear them down, build a single-family home, your alley's going to be torn up again. There's really no extra cost to put that extra stub out in. It is a minimal cost. I'd like to make one comment on prevailing wages. You don't have to require prevailing wages on your city hall or any project. If that contractor, and I was a union contractor for 40 years, the only union card I personally carried was a Union Oil credit card at one time. But if you're signatory to a contract, irregardless of what the contract requirements from the municipality are, you're going to be paying prevailing wages. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My name's Bruce Brandenburg. The main reason to come up here is to say District 101, other than our redo, went exceptionally well, and it's all because of this lady over here, because she communicated with the district. Okay, so Iris is the one that made that happen. If you look at the guiding principles, a lot of that came because of what the city did and things that we suggested, and that's what you need. And to address what Councilman Hinn's saying, is you should have a compelling reason to go away from it. And maybe that's what all the assessment engineers have to look at. When you look at aesthetics, you'd have to go on a person's house to determine whether that pole is seen, or the lines are seen. And we have upstairs, downstairs, or that reverse thing. You know, the living quarters are upstairs. So you really have to look at all these factors that, guess what, it's equal. Square footage is the answer. The aesthetics, if you're talking about looking at the lines on a hillside, well, then you wouldn't assess people on the water because their poles are behind them. So we're an outdoor community, and that's what it's all about. We're outdoors all the time. If you're inside, you're not seeing the poles. Safety, in our district, we had to argue that, you know, the pole, like whoever was saying it could fall on anybody's house. Well, they weren't going to assess the houses across the street because the poles were on the other side. Well, the lines go across the street, so in a high wind, that lines could break before the poles could break. So at the end of the day, I think you guys have come a long way. The guiding principles make it work. If you get into a district and you can't come up with a compelling reason, as one of my people used to say in Chicago, don't grind the mosquito shit any more than it already is. So the only last thing I'd say on 20A, I think we spoke a long time ago, we felt that we made a decision that we weren't going to get anywhere. We felt that it applied to us because we feed the rest of the peninsula, and I think you have to go back and come up with a plan, which you said you would, that I think some politics were involved over the years. We're way mortgaged out. I think next time they come available, you can't look at it unless it's on an overall plan for the city to make sure it's just not taking care of somebody's area. And that'd be my last comment. But once again, I got to thank Iris Lee for making 101 think it's probably the fastest, even with our delays.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this item? Okay, bring it back. Anything else, council? Okay, next, public comments on non-agenda items. Okay, seeing no one, we're adjourned to closed session.
Okay, did you get Levon? City Council.